Good morning. It is truly a privilege to be back again. You are so kind to invite another summer. And thank you, Uncle Ray, for including the boys in today's service. You're a beautiful congregation doing beautiful work, important work in this community. And I'm very grateful. Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing in your sight. O God, you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Many of us have authors that companion us as we journey through the world, and I have loved Annie Dillard for a long time. And I picked up a book again that she wrote in 1999, and it's called For the Time Being, a book that was written years ago. Our oldest son, John Brogan, was born late in the year of 1998, so this book is as old as he is tall. And when I think about all the things that have happened since 1999, when she wrote this book, it makes my heart stop beating a little bit when we think of what the world has been through since 1998, when we think about what our country has lived through, as well as this state and this city and our families and ourselves. Think of all that has happened. And yet the words and the questions of this book speak as though they could be heard today. Important words, important questions. It's not an easy read, but it's important, I think. It's been very helpful for me. She struggles with life's questions, and she calls on where God is present in the midst of them. And one of the questions that she asks is how human beings tick. What makes us work? What makes us do the things we do and live through the things we live through and are able to get up the next morning? One of the things she wonders about, and I do too, is how do we do it? How do we do it? She gives the example in this book of there was a little girl who got lost in the woods in Connecticut. 12-year-old girl got lost in the woods. 200 people dropped what they were doing. People drove in from other counties and states and kept looking until that girl was found. And she read in the paper late in April 1991 that 137,000 people from Bangladesh were killed in a tsunami. And she turned the page of the newspaper to read what was next. How do we do that? And we do. One child lost in the woods, and we run and look until that child is found. 137,000 people killed in a tsunami. And we turn the page and we drink more coffee. And we do this day after day after day. Recently, this summer, 12 boys and their coach were lost in a cave. And the world stopped, right? And some say it was technology. Some say it was word of mouth. Some say it was the pride of a country. But institutions came together, bodies came together, countries came together until those 13 souls were brought out of the cave. A miracle, people say. And 2,500 families, 2,500 children were separated at the border in Texas. And we turn the page of our newspaper and we drink our coffee. How do we do that? How do we wait? How do we be a part of the next miracle that needs to happen? In her book, she writes so well. She says, there are 1 billion, this is 1999, 1,198,500,000 people alive now in China. To get a feel for what that means, simply take yourself in all your singularity, your importance, your complexity, and your love, and multiply it by 1,198,500,000. See? Nothing to it. I think it is our work, possibly of this time. You know, they have already called the greatest generation who's lived in the past. Well, what is it for our generation? Maybe it's our work to do what is next for these 2,500 children. Maybe it is. It's hard to get our head around. So I was thinking about, this morning when I was walking, I was thinking about 19 years ago. And I was trying to imagine, what if it were that there was, maybe say in January, a Linda and a Leslie who were walking through Honduras, who were walking through Guatemala, who were walking through Mexico. And they had a baby boy, 6 months old. And they were no longer safe in their country because they chose to love each other. What if they realized that their only hope was to go to the place where they had heard their whole lives that there was freedom, and there was possibility, and there was hope, and there was promise, and there was light, and there was compassion, and there was justice? What if they chose to leave the streets they knew to walk, to leave the food they knew to eat, to leave the families who loved them, and bundled their baby boy and made their way to the United States because their whole lives they had heard that there was some lady standing in a harbor who promised. And they weren't smart enough or sophisticated enough or wealthy enough to do what they needed to do, but they put all they had into a bag and they bundled their young child and they came north. $2,500. 700 not yet reunited with their families. 463 possibly never to be reunited. Who are we? How are we? What is this miracle we are calling on? What are we to do? We are wired to go into the woods. That's who we are. That's who I've been grown up to be. That's who I was raised to be. We have become comfortable turning the page and reading the next story. What if this is the story of our generation? We can't leave it all to the Eagle Scouts, although by golly, we leave some of it to you and to you and to us. So you're thinking, Leslie, please get to the Gospel of John. Well, I'm going to get to the Gospel of John, but I want to tell you honestly and faithfully, the Gospel of John brought me to that. I promise you. So the Gospel of John, what's different about the Gospel of John? The Gospel of John is not the typical gospel. There is no Bethlehem story to get us started. Instead, there are these beautiful, wonderful, wonderfully written words that say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Remember that? That is Jesus' birth story. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Remember? And the light came, and the darkness could not put it out. Remember? Those are the words of John. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish. The woman at the well. I am the living water. Jesus in the Gospel of John becomes images as well as words. Remember, I am statements. I am the living water. I am the vine. You are the branches. I am the light of the world. The Gospel of John. Stories don't always follow horizontally, but words gather us in. And so the words for this morning from the 6th chapter of John, talk about two miracle stories. Remember, we heard two miracle stories. The first miracle story that you read so beautifully, the first miracle story was about the feeding of the 5,000. 5,000. 5,000. 12 loaves, 2 fishes, 5,000. How does it happen? It's a miracle. This miracle story teaches us who God is through Jesus. This miracle story teaches us that God knows us and knows our needs. In this story, perhaps as much as any story, Jesus is human and divine in the same place. Jesus knows what it's like to need something. Jesus knows what it's like to be tired. He knows what it's like to be hungry. And so he got folks to a comfortable place and asked them to sit down. And then he planned. And he asked, and he figured out, and he used his friends. And then when the 12 loaves were brought and the fish, he gave thanks. And he broke and he gave it to them. Sound familiar? We do it on the first Sunday of the month. The truth is we do it every meal that we eat. This miracle lives in us. This blessing of the 12 loaves and the 2 fishes. And then Jesus is probably tired, worn out, exhausted. 5,000 people. Can you imagine the noise of that? Can you imagine the singing of that? Can you imagine the joy of that when everyone ate who was hungry? And when that was done, he went off onto a hill. And the disciples got restless and nervous, and they got in a boat, and they went across the Sea of Galilee. And as has happened sometimes, the Sea of Galilee, winds started blowing. And because it's in a basin, storms come up before you even know it. Even though the guys in the boat were fishermen and should have seen it coming, sometimes you just can't see a storm. And they got in the boat, and they went across, and the storm was coming, and they were afraid. And what happened? A miracle. They see Jesus, what? Walking on the water towards them. Now, in this day and age of computers and these wacky movies where things happen like this all the time, you got to know that when many of us were growing up, this was a big deal. This walking on the water thing was a big deal. I know that many in this room take it for granted, but this story is a big deal. This is a miracle. And it happens. What causes things to be miracles? sometimes they do happen to a person in a quiet place, and that person is the only one to witness. Sometimes miracles happen like that. But more often than not, miracles are witnessed by others. Others see them, and then they tell and they tell and they tell. Miracles like the 2 stories in the 6th chapter of John were miracles that people participated in and witnessed and told, both. Okay, here's a confession. When I was asked in May for the title of the sermon that I was going to preach the last Sunday in July, I said, hey, how about if we tell that old story about, and Fred Craddock would not appreciate, Fred Craddock was my preaching teacher at Candler, and he said, never use a joke. And if you do use a joke in a sermon, make it a good one. Well, Dr. Craddock, I apologize going into it. Not that it's a really bad joke, but here's the title of the sermon, inserted here. So there's a faithful man who lives by a river. And he prays every day, and he goes to church, and he goes to Sunday school. He's an usher, he tithes, he's holy. It starts to rain. Starts to rain, kind of like yesterday. Boy, that was a rain. It starts to rain, starts to rain, starts to rain, starts to rain. And a man comes by this faithful man's house, and he yells from his rowboat, "It's supposed to rain. Want to jump in? It's going to get really exciting." And the guy goes, "Oh no, I'm a man of faith. I'll be fine. God will save me." The rowboat goes by. The water comes up. The water that was at the riverside is now to his house. Speedboat comes by in his front yard, not used to that. The speedboat says, "Hey, it's going to rain, really coming. Want to ride? I'm a man of faith. I'm fine. God will save me." It rains. The man finds himself on his roof. A helicopter comes by. The helicopter yells, "It's really raining. There's a flood. You want to ride?" The guy says, "I'm a man of faith. I'll be fine. God will save me." The man drowns. When he goes to heaven, he is a little cranky with God. Not that it's ever happened at all. And the gentleman says, "Hey, I'm a man of faith. What happened? I thought you would save me." And God says, "I sent a rowboat, a speedboat, and a helicopter. What do you want from me?" Right? I apologize, Dr. Craddock. Did you notice in that story that it was humans who came? Did you notice in that story that the faithful man missed it? Did you notice that? This is a time in our country that I have never experienced before. This is a time in our country where we turn away from one another faster than we turn towards each other. This is a time in our country where somehow we know if somebody votes for somebody else, we know how that person thinks. This is a time in our country where we need to be careful, because I believe we are missing one another and we will miss ourselves, just as that poor man sat on his front porch as the water came up. By walking through those doors, by coming into this place on this day, you are saying that something is more important to you than if you're red or blue, if you pull a lever for one or the other, if something is on your bumper sticker that says one person as opposed to another. By coming into this space, we are all saying that being a Republican or a Democrat isn't nearly as important as who calls me to here, to this place, as who wakes me up every morning. by coming into this place, we are setting our course, picking up again today our compass, and saying yes. We are people of faith first, lest we forget. We are people of faith first. Whosoever we are people of faith first. What words guide us as people of faith? Words from Micah chapter 6, remember those words? What does the Lord require of us? But to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly. What were Jesus' words when he was asked, what's the most important commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul. And Jesus said, and your neighbor as yourself. Remember that rich young lawyer in the Gospel of Luke said, but Jesus, who is my neighbor? In the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 16, many of us learned when we were in Sunday school, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whosoever believeth in me shall not perish, but have eternal life. It's the 14th word I want us to pay attention to today. Now, there are some people in this room probably who know right away what the 14th word is, and some of you are now not listening to me because you're going, whosoever. Whosoever. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Whosoever is the most important thing. Whosoever. It's not those who look like us or speak like us or who have as much money or who have more money. It's not those who eat the same food. We don't choose whosoever's. God does. And that's the point. God does. Whosoever. Miracles happen because we participate in them. Miracles happen because people choose to love one another as they love God. That's the miracle. That's the day. That's the message. There was this wonderful, beautiful woman who belonged to our church who died this summer, Janice. She sang in the choir with us. Sam and I got to know her. Janice was never partnered, was I think, third grade teacher. Janice traveled most every summer so she could come back and teach her classroom about whosomevers, so that the children in Atlanta, Georgia, could learn about the children in Israel, could learn about the children in Italy, could learn about the children in Ireland, could learn about the children in Kenya. Whosoever's are all of us, and Janice carried them with her for her kids to meet. She had been sick most of this year, and she had a heart condition that she could not recover from. And so this past spring, late spring, early summer, before the election runoffs happened, There was a gentleman who was running for governor of our state, Georgia, and his platform was to drive a bus around, and written on the back of it, on the side of it, was something about taking people home or getting them out of here or whatever. And he would drive around, and his platform was to pick up people who weren't born in this country, who came here illegally, perhaps Linda and Leslie's of the next generation, and take them back. I think that was his idea. But he brought his bus to Clarkston, Georgia, 5 miles from our church. And so some folks from our congregation and many folks from Atlanta went out to protest and to say, no, not here, not now. That's not who we are. That's not who we choose to follow. That's not who we love. Janice was very sick and possibly knew she was dying. But it mattered to her that she go and be a part of a message to that hate. And so she got dressed up that morning, and it was raining. And she felt so awful that she couldn't get out of her car. So she wrote on a piece of paper and put in her window, "I vote to love my neighbor," so that anyone who passed by could see. She didn't have the strength to get out of her car, but it mattered to her that only because we participate in the change does change happen. It mattered to her that if a miracle was to come, she wanted to be a part of it. After that protest, she drove herself to DeKalb Medical, was admitted into the hospital, and went into coma that night and never woke up. She died a couple days later. If we could choose how we would spend the last day on this earth, who would we stand with? What would we stand for? How would it matter to us? What is our work to do? Teresa of Avila lived in the 1500s, and she wrote she wrote a prayer that many of us have heard. Christ has no body but ours, no hands, no feet on earth but ours. Ours are the eyes through which Christ looks with compassion on this world. Ours are the feet with which Christ walks to do good. Ours are the hands through which Christ blesses all the world. Ours are the hands, the feet, the eyes. Ours, you and me. We are Christ's body. Christ has no body on this earth but us. It's been a privilege to be in this congregation Sunday after Sunday, and it is your practice at the end of the service to sing a song. And you sing it faithfully. My prayer for today is that after I have sung it, that I remember when I walk from this room, this building, that the miracle will happen for those 700 children that have yet to be reunited with their families. Through me and through you. Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I have heard you calling in the night. I will come, Lord, if you lead me. I will hold your people.